My career was built on the unshakable belief that the law was black and white. But one afternoon in Judge Caprio's courtroom, my entire world was about to shatter. The hum in the Providence Municipal Courtroom was a familiar sound, a low-grade thrum of anxiety and cheap cologne. I stood by the prosecution table, ramrod straight, my uniform pressed to a razor's edge. I prided myself on my professionalism, a rock of order in a sea of chaos. And from my vantage point, Judge Frank Caprio's courtroom was the epitome of chaos. It was less a court of law and more a television studio with a gavel. Cameras, hidden but present, captured every folksy quip, every tearful plea, every moment of what the world saw as compassionate justice. I saw it as a circus. I'd been on the Providence PD for 12 years. I knew the vehicle code backward and forward. I knew the streets, the scams, the excuses. My job was to enforce the law as written. No exceptions. No sob stories. The law was the law. It was black and white for a reason. Judge Caprio, with all his grandfatherly charm, loved to paint in shades of gray. He'd listen to a single mother who ran a red light because her kid spilled juice in the back, and he'd end up talking about his own grandchildren before dismissing the ticket. The crowd would applaud, the YouTube clip would get 1 million views, and out on the street, the standard of driving would slip another inch toward anarchy. My case was up next, a simple one, a rolling stop. I'd seen it from my cruiser, plain as day. A silver sedan, driven by an elderly woman, barely touched her brakes before sailing through the intersection. It was a 4-way stop in a residential neighborhood, right near a school. Kids could have been crossing. It was exactly the kind of lazy, dangerous driving I had zero tolerance for. I cited her, she opted for a court date, and now here we were, about to be part of the Judge Caprio show. Case number 7.42, the City of Providence versus Eleanor Gable, the bailiff called out. A woman with a cloud of white hair and a floral print dress made her way slowly to the defendant's lectern. She clutched her handbag with both hands, her knuckles white. She looked terrified. Good. A little respect for the process was a start. Judge Caprio peered over his glasses at her, a gentle smile already forming. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable. How are you today?" "I'm all right, Your Honor. A little nervous," she said, her voice thin and reedy. "No need to be nervous," he soothed. "We're all friends here. Now, you received a citation from Officer Miller for failing to come to a complete stop at a stop sign. How do you plead?" "Well, Your Honor," she began, twisting the strap of her bag, I think I did stop. Maybe not for as long as I should have. I was on my way to the pharmacy, my husband's prescription was ready, and I was just a little distracted." I felt my jaw tighten. The classic excuse. A little distracted. Distracted is how accidents happen. Caprio nodded thoughtfully. "Officer Miller, step forward, please." I took 3 crisp steps, my boots echoing slightly on the floor. I faced the judge, avoiding eye contact with the cameras. This wasn't for them. This was for the law. "Officer, please tell us what you observed," Caprio said. "Your Honor," I began, my voice clear and firm. At approximately 10:15 a.m. on the date in question, I was positioned at the intersection of Elm Street and Oak Avenue. I observed the defendant's vehicle approach the intersection. The vehicle's speed decreased, but at no point did its wheels cease their rotation. The defendant then proceeded through the intersection. Per Rhode Island General Law 3129, a full and complete stop is required. The defendant failed to comply. I laid it out perfectly. No emotion, just facts. Just the law. Caprio turned back to Mrs. Gable. "Ma'am, the officer states your wheels never stop turning." "Is that possible?" I suppose it's possible," she conceded, her shoulders slumping. "My arthritis was acting up, and sometimes my foot, it just doesn't press as hard as I want it to." Here it comes, I thought. The medical excuse. Cue the violins. "I see," Caprio said, his expression softening. He looked at her record on his monitor. "Mrs. Gable, it says here you've been driving for 62 years, and you've never had a single moving violation. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor. I've always been a very careful driver." I had to intervene. This was slipping away. This was how the standards eroded. "Your Honor," I said, a little too forcefully. Caprio's eyes flicked to me. The gentle smile was gone. "Yes, officer?" "With all due respect, Your Honor, the defendant's prior record, while admirable, has no bearing on the events of that day. The law does not make an exception for a 62-year clean streak. The statute is explicit. A full stop is required. She broke the law." The courtroom went quiet. You could feel the air shift. Arguing procedure with a judge, especially this judge on his home turf, was a bold move. I knew it, but I didn't care. I was right. Judge Caprio leaned forward, folding his hands on his desk. His voice was low, but it carried a new weight, a current of steel beneath the calm surface. Officer, are you attempting to instruct me on how to interpret the law in my own courtroom? No, Your Honor, I replied, keeping my back straight. I am simply stating the facts and the applicable statute. The law is not a matter of interpretation in this case. It is absolute. The defendant's wheels did not stop. That is a failure to comply. End of story. I could feel the heat from the lights, the unseen eyes of the cameras, the collective breath-holding of the audience. They were seeing a side of the show they rarely got. A cop who wouldn't play along, who wouldn't bend for the heartwarming moment. Caprio held my gaze for a long, uncomfortable moment. The folksy grandpa was gone, replaced by a man who had presided over thousands of cases and heard every argument imaginable. He wasn't angry. He was something far more dangerous. He was dissecting me. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a strange, almost curious look on his face. He glanced at the file, then back at me. I appreciate your passion for the letter of the law, Officer Miller. Truly I do, he said, his voice deceptively mild. It is important. But since we are being so very precise about the events of that morning, I have just one more question for you. Did you happen to review your body camera footage from this specific traffic stop before coming to court today? The judge's question hung in the air like a bad smell. My body camera footage? Of course I hadn't reviewed it. Why would I need to? I was there. I was the trained observer. My memory, honed by 12 years of street work, was more reliable than some shaky, wide-angle video. This was a classic Caprio tactic. Create doubt where there was none, muddy the clear waters of the law to get the result he wanted. I stood even straighter, a pillar of unwavering certainty. No, Your Honor, I did not, I said, my voice level. As I stated, my observation of the event was direct and unobstructed. Reviewing the footage would have been redundant. The facts are not in dispute. A low murmur rippled through the gallery. They could sense the confrontation. This was better than a sob story. This was a showdown. Judge Caprio simply nodded, as if my answer was exactly what he expected. Redundant, I see, he mused, tapping a pen on his desk. Well, officer, you pride yourself on facts, on precision, and I, for one, find that admirable. So in the spirit of that precision, let's not rely on anyone's memory, not even that of a decorated officer. He turned to the bailiff. Anthony, please display the footage from Officer Miller's body-worn camera, corresponding to the time of the citation. My heart gave a single, hard thump against my ribs, not from fear, but from indignation. He was calling me out, publicly questioning my word over a routine traffic stop. The sheer audacity of it. This wasn't justice, this was theater, and he was casting me as the villain. I held my ground, my expression a mask of professional indifference. Let him play the tape. It would show exactly what I said it would show. A silver sedan, rolling through a stop sign. The sooner this charade was over, the sooner I could get back to actual police work. The large monitor on the courtroom wall, usually displaying case dockets, flickered to life. The view was familiar. The perspective from my own chest. The top of my cruiser's steering wheel, my gloved hands, the road ahead through the windshield. The audio hissed with the ambient noise of the car. I heard my own voice, clear and clipped, calling in the license plate. Silver sedan, Rhode Island plate. The footage was stable as I watched Mrs. Gable's car approach the intersection from the cross street, just as I remembered. It slowed, the nose dipped slightly as she applied the brakes. And then, it kept going. The wheels never stopped their rotation. They turned slowly, deliberately, but they never stopped. A wave of smug satisfaction washed over me. There it was, inarguable, digital proof. I chanced a glance at Judge Caprio, ready to meet his eyes with a look that said, I told you so. But he wasn't looking at me. His eyes, and the eyes of everyone else in the courtroom, were glued to the screen, to something on the periphery of the frame that I had completely filtered out. As Mrs. Gable's car was performing its illegal role, the camera, fixed to my chest, captured the sidewalk to the right of the intersection. An elderly man, walking with a pronounced limp and the help of a four-pronged cane, was approaching the crosswalk. Just as the sedan reached the white line, the man's foot caught on an uneven piece of pavement. He stumbled forward, lurching violently, his cane skittering out in front of him. He didn't fall, but for a terrifying second he was completely off balance, windmilling his arms right at the edge of the street. The video showed Mrs. Gable's car hesitate. It didn't stop, but it also didn't accelerate. It rolled forward another 2 or 3 feet, clearing the crosswalk, giving the stumbling man a wide, safe buffer as he struggled to regain his footing. Her rolling stop wasn't an act of negligence. It was a conscious, split-second decision to cede the right-of-way to a pedestrian in distress. She hadn't run the stop sign out of laziness. She had adjusted her position to avoid a potential catastrophe. The blood drained from my face. My mind raced, trying to reconcile the memory in my head with the reality on the screen. I had been so laser-focused on the vehicle's tires, on the absolute letter of Statute 3129, that I had failed to observe the entire context of the situation. I hadn't seen the man. I had filtered out the single most important piece of information. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the faint hum of the monitor. On the screen, the image was frozen at the critical moment. Mrs. Gable's car a few feet past the line, and the elderly man, now upright but shaken, clutching his cane on the sidewalk. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on me. I looked at Mrs. Gable. She wasn't looking at me with anger, but with a kind of sad pity. It was worse than any accusation. Judge Caprio let the silence stretch for an eternity before he spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His words were quiet, precise, and they cut me to the bone. "Officer Miller," he said, his gaze pinning me in place. "You testified under oath that the defendant simply broke the law. But this footage seems to suggest she was upholding a much more important one, a duty of care to her fellow citizens. You stand here as an expert witness for the city. So tell me, officer, as an expert, which is the greater violation, failing to have your wheels cease rotation for a fraction of a second, or failing to see a human being in peril right in front of you?" The judge's question was a punch to the gut. It wasn't a legal question. It was a moral one, and he was asking it in a courtroom, on camera for the entire world to see. My throat felt like it was filled with sand. All my training, my years of service, my unwavering belief in the black and white clarity of the law, it all crumbled under the weight of that simple, damning video. I was a professional observer who had failed to observe. My mind scrambled for a defense, a legal foothold in the quicksand that was swallowing me whole. "Your Honor," I croaked, my voice cracking slightly. I cleared my throat, forcing the words out. The statute is about the stop sign. Her duty of care to the pedestrian doesn't negate her legal obligation to come to a complete stop at the line. She could have and should have done both. It was a weak argument, and I knew it. A lawyer's argument, not a police officer's. It was the desperate flailing of a man who knew he was wrong but couldn't bring himself to admit it. Judge Caprio looked at me, not with anger, but with a profound sense of disappointment that felt infinitely worse. "So, in your expert opinion, officer, the perfect, legally compliant action would have been for Mrs. Gable to slam on her brakes at the line, stopping completely, which might have startled the already unsteady pedestrian, potentially causing him to fall into the street in front of her car. Is that the outcome the law desires? He had me. He had me cornered and exposed. Every eye in that room was a scalpel, peeling back the layers of my pride and professionalism to reveal the hollow arrogance beneath. I had been so focused on the infraction that I missed the intent. I saw a lawbreaker, not a helper. "That's a hypothetical, Your Honor," I stammered. "No, officer, it's a reality," he countered, his voice sharp as broken glass. "It's the reality you failed to witness. You testified that the facts were not in dispute, but you only presented one fact, the rolling tires. You omitted the most important fact of all, the human being. The law, Officer Miller, is not a blind, unthinking machine. It is a framework designed to facilitate a safe and civil society. And in this instance, it seems Mrs. Gable understood the spirit of that framework far better than the man tasked with enforcing it." He turned his attention to Eleanor Gable, his expression softening once more into the familiar grandfatherly visage. "Mrs. Gable, you were distracted, you said. Distracted by a man who was about to fall into the street. It seems to me that was the best kind of distraction. Case dismissed." He banged his gavel, a sharp, definitive sound that echoed the snapping of my career. "And the court will be assessing a $100 fine against the city of Providence to compensate Mrs. Gable for the time and distress this ordeal has caused her." Gasps rippled through the gallery. Fining the city? It was unheard of. It was a direct public rebuke of me, and by extension, my department. I felt my face flush with a hot, prickling shame. I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me. I had walked in here a respected officer. I was going to walk out a cautionary tale, a viral video clip titled, Arrogant cop gets schooled by Judge Caprio. My mind was a blur. The bailiff called the next case. Mrs. Gable gave me a hesitant, sympathetic look before shuffling out of the courtroom. I stood frozen for a moment, unable to move. My entire worldview, my professional identity, had been dismantled in less than 5 minutes. The law wasn't black and white. It was a million shades of gray, and I had been blind to all of them. Finally, my legs started working again. I turned mechanically and walked toward the exit, my back ramrod straight out of sheer habit, even though I felt crushed. I didn't look at the crowd. I didn't look at my fellow officers who were waiting for their own cases. I just walked. As I pushed through the courtroom doors into the noisy hallway, a hand clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, my instincts flaring, ready for a confrontation. It was Sergeant DeLuca, my direct supervisor. He was a bull of a man, with a face that looked like it had been carved from granite and left out in the rain. His expression was grim. "Miller," he grunted, his grip tightening. "My office. Now." The walk to the courthouse substation was the longest of my life. DeLuca didn't say another word, just marched a half-step behind me, his silence more damning than any tirade. People in the halls, lawyers and clerks and other cops moved aside for us. Some of them stared. They'd already heard. News in a courthouse travels faster than gossip in a high school. We entered his small, cluttered office, and he slammed the door behind us. He leaned back against it, crossing his thick arms over his chest. He just stared at me for a full 30 seconds, letting me stew in my own humiliation. "You know," he finally said, his voice a low rumble. "I've had to stand in front of internal affairs and defend my officers for a lot of things. Bad shoots, rough arrests, car accidents, you name it. But I never, in my 25 years on the force, thought I'd have to explain why one of my senior officers got into a pissing contest with Frank Caprio on live television and lost. Sarge, Shut up," he snapped. "Just shut up. You didn't just embarrass yourself in there, Miller. You embarrassed this entire department. You made us all look like petty, blindsided bullies who can't see past the ink in the law book." He pushed himself off the door and walked to his desk, picking up a single sheet of paper. He didn't look at it. He already knew what it said. "The chief called me before you were even out of the courtroom. The city's phone lines are already lighting up. Some community action group saw the live feed, and they're calling for your badge. They're demanding a full review of all your contested citations for the last 5 years. He threw the paper on the desk. It was a formal complaint form. "This is just the start." My stomach turned to ice. A review of all my tickets. For 5 years. I had written thousands. I was a stickler. I prided myself on it. But how many of them were like Mrs. Gable's? How many times had I been so focused on the letter of the law that I had missed the whole picture? "Sarge, it was one stop," I pleaded. "I made a mistake. I missed something." "No, you didn't just miss something," DeLuca shot back, his voice rising. "You doubled down on it. You argued with the judge. You tried to tell him his business. You refused to even consider you might be wrong. That's the problem, Miller. Not the ticket. The arrogance." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "Look, the chief wants you on desk duty, effective immediately, pending a full internal review. Desk duty. It was a cop's purgatory, a slow, agonizing death of paperwork and fluorescent lights. It was where they sent you when they didn't trust you on the street anymore. And there's something else," DeLuca said, his voice dropping. He looked genuinely troubled now. "When the IT guys pulled your body cam footage for the judge, they didn't just pull that one clip. They pulled the whole card, standard procedure. An hour before and an hour after the Gable stop." He paused, looking me straight in the eye. "They found another stop you made about 20 minutes before you cited Mrs. Gable, a young kid on a moped. You wrote him up for an equipment violation, a broken taillight." I vaguely remembered it. A quick, easy citation. "Yeah? So?" DeLuca leaned forward, his hands flat on the desk. "So the footage shows that after you handed him the ticket and drove away, you circled the block. And your camera recorded you talking to yourself in the car." He took a deep breath. "And it recorded you saying something I'm going to need you to explain to me right now." A cold dread, far deeper and more terrifying than the public humiliation I just endured, washed over me. Talking to myself? I did that sometimes, muttering under my breath after a frustrating stop, blowing off steam. What could I possibly have said? My mind raced, frantically trying to recall the moped stop. The kid was young, maybe 19, on a beat-up scooter that was probably his only way to get to his fast food job. The taillight was genuinely broken. It was a legitimate, by-the-book citation. What did I say, Sarge? My voice was barely a whisper. DeLuca's eyes were like chips of flint. The audio is crystal clear, Miller. After you pulled away, you said, and I quote, "That'll teach the little punk to have a busted taillight. Quota's a bitch." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. Quota. The dirty, unspoken word that haunted every department. Officially, we didn't have quotas. Officially, we were just supposed to enforce the law. But every cop knew the truth. At the end of every month, the sergeants looked at your numbers, your citations, your arrests. Low numbers meant you weren't being productive. It meant you got bad shifts, passed over for overtime, stuck with the worst duties. And my numbers, for the first time in years, had been low that month. "Sarge, it's not what it sounds like," I stammered, the pathetic weakness of the lie choking me. "Isn't it?" DeLuca fired back, his voice raw with contempt. "Because it sounds exactly like what it is. It sounds like you weren't writing that kid a ticket for public safety. It sounds like you were writing it for your stats. And if you were writing him up to make your quota, then how many other people did you cite for the same reason? How does that look, Miller, when it comes out that the officer who lectured Judge Caprio about the absolute letter of the law was just trying to pad his numbers?" He didn't need to answer. I knew how it looked. It was career suicide. The video from the courtroom was bad enough. It made me look arrogant and incompetent. But this audio was the nail in the coffin. It painted me as a hypocrite and a predator, targeting people for petty infractions, not for safety, but for my own personal benefit. Combined, the two incidents didn't just suggest a mistake, they revealed a pattern. They showed a man who had lost his way, who valued the rulebook over reality and his stats over his sworn duty. I sank into the visitor's chair opposite his desk, the starched stiffness of my uniform suddenly feeling like a costume. My pride, my identity, my 12 years of service, it all evaporated in that cramped office. I was a fraud. Even worse, I hadn't even realized it. I had convinced myself that my rigidity was integrity, that my relentless ticketing was a crusade for order. But it wasn't. It had become a game, and I was just trying to win. "What's going to happen?" I asked, the fight completely gone from my voice. DeLuca sat down heavily in his own chair, the anger draining out of him, replaced by a weary resignation. "Internal Affairs is going to have a field day. They'll pull every ticket you've ever written. They'll interview every person who ever filed a complaint against you. The city's lawyers will be screaming. The chief, he can't defend you. Not from this. He's got the footage from Caprio's court and an audio recording of you admitting you're writing tickets to make quota. It's an open and shut case." He ran a hand over his tired face. "Best case? They let you resign. You walk away, keep your pension, and never wear a badge again. Worst case? They make an example of you. Fire you for cause, bring charges for falsifying reports, perjury, you name it. Resign." The word felt alien. The thought of not putting on the uniform every morning, of not being Officer Miller, was like contemplating an amputation. It was all I was. The next few days were a blur of meetings with a union rep who looked at me with pity, and interviews with stone-faced IA detectives who treated me like a criminal. The courtroom video went viral, just as I knew it would. I was a meme, a punchline, but the story about the hot mic, the quota admission, was the one that stuck. It was the one that made local and even national news. My career wasn't just over. It was being autopsied on a public slab. The choice was simple: resign or be crucified. A week after my disastrous court appearance, I sat at my kitchen table with my resignation letter. My badge and service weapon were in a box on the counter. My career was over. The humiliation was immense, but underneath it, something else was beginning to stir. A painful, terrifying, but necessary flicker of self-awareness. Judge Caprio hadn't just ended my career. He had held up a mirror, and the body camera had provided the light. I didn't like what I saw. I saw a man who had become so obsessed with the rules that he'd forgotten why the rules existed in the first place. I had traded compassion for compliance and wisdom for statistics. My last official act was to write 2 letters. The first was my resignation. The second was a short, handwritten note. A few days later, a small, elderly woman with a cloud of white hair opened her front door to find a plain envelope in her mailbox. Inside was a check for $100 and a simple, unsigned note. It read, "Dear Mrs. Gable, I'm sorry. You were right to be distracted. Thank you for reminding me what's truly important. It wasn't a legal absolution, and it wouldn't fix my life, but as I walked away from the mailbox, a civilian for the first time in my adult life, I felt the crushing weight on my shoulders lighten. Just a little. My career was over, but for the first time in a very long time, I could finally see the whole picture.